Good morning. Welcome to our Sunday morning Bible study. So happy you could join us this morning. We're still in the book of Proverbs. We're looking this morning at Proverbs chapter 14, verses 8 through 15. But before I get into our verses, I wanted to mention a little bit about the way that Solomon has written Proverbs. I don't know if anyone else has mentioned this, but Proverbs is made up of several sections. Some are large and some are small. For instance, chapters 1 through 9 is a very well-written discourse for parents in training their young adult males. Training of the youth wasn't especially important in this society in Solomon's day. So he covers topics like virtues of wisdom and the danger of sexual immorality and other things. There are some larger sections in Proverbs, in the book of Proverbs, for example, chapters 10 through 29, and which are just a collection of pithy sayings not arranged in any particular order. Within some of these larger sections, there are small subsections, and that's why I'm getting to about our verses today. Verses 8 through 15 in chapter 14 is a subsection of this larger section. Many of these smaller subsections deal with a contrast of the fates of the righteous with those of the wicked people. Our commentary said that the proverb form is well designed for teaching and learning. Proverbs are clear and easy to remember. Well, I don't know that I would agree with that. I find Proverbs very difficult to understand, very difficult to teach. The verses that we're looking at today, and if you have your student manual there with you, you'll notice something a little odd. That is, the verses are not in order. The verses are arranged in a poetic form or pattern called a chiasmus, and that's a $10 word for you this morning. The verses are arranged in pairs so they express similar, if not the same word or ideas, but kind of in reverse order. And you'll see that as we go through our lesson today. So today, our verses are paired like this. 8 and 15 are paired together. 9 and 14 are paired together. 10 and 13 are paired together, and 11 and 12 are paired together. When we get to 11 and 12, that's really the main thought of this little subsection or this little chiasma, as you would have it. Solomon was a truly wise person, and he truly had some great literary styles, and that's what we see in the book of Proverbs. So begin with verse 8 this morning. And he's talking about the prudent, and we'll get into that. In this pairing, Solomon contrasts the wise and the foolish. The wise, he says, is prudent, while the foolish person is gullible. Verse 8 says this. This is the New King James Version, by the way. The wisdom of the prudent is to understand the way, but the folly of the fools is deceit. Now, the Christian Standard Bible says, a sensible person's wisdom instead of the wisdom of the prudent. I wanted to find a few words here in this verse before we get into it. Wisdom, what is wisdom? Well, it's not the same as knowledge. Wisdom is making the appropriate use of knowledge. He talks about way there in this verse. A lot of times that's used in Scripture to talk about a path, a way through a field, a path through the field. In this case, it's the path of one's life, or our actions and behaviors or lifestyles. So, what is Solomon telling us? He's saying that the sensible person or the prudent person is one who examines his or her lifestyle. And he's talking about examining our lifestyle in light of God's wisdom and in light of our experiences. It's learning from our failures. It's correcting those mistakes as we go along and not to repeat them. In contrast, he says the fools, those that seem incapable of making a rational moral choice, they refuse to select what is good and they fail to reject what is evil. Foolish people's foolish ways deceive them so that they no longer recognize God's wisdom when they see it. They no longer recognize any kind of wisdom. They are like our cliche today, doing the same thing over and over again and expect different results. It's just not going to happen. The paired verse with verse 8 is verse 15. It says, the simple believes every word, but the prudent considers well his steps. Solomon is saying pretty much the same thing in different words in reverse order. The Christian Standard Bible has experienced one there instead of simple. And he says to consider, and that means to give thought to discern, to understand, the ability to discern or gain insight into something. They are easily deceived, these gullible ones he talks about, the simple believers. They're easily deceived, they're naive, they're gullible, which links back to the fools of verse 8, the second part of verse 8. Their condition is many times the result of a laziness or an unwillingness to learn. I think about the book of Corinthians where Paul wrote to the believers there, and he called them babes in the word. They were just not progressing. They, through laziness or whatever, or unwillingness, were not progressing in the Christian faith. It's also kind of related to that double-minded person that James writes about in James chapter 1. But in contrast, the sensible one or the prudent one watches or considers his steps. And here Solomon just uses an analogy of our life as a journey along a path. And I don't know if you've ever gone hiking or been out in the woods walking, or growing up as kids, we'd get out and play, and many times we would play near creeks and have to cross the creek, and we'd be real careful where we step. We'd consider our steps. And that's what Solomon's talking about. Consider our actions in life in regards to God's wisdom. So in our next chiastic or pairing is verses 9 and 14. And these verses deal with the idea of contentment versus discontentment. Verse 9, fools mock at sin, but among the upright there is favor. Now again, this verse is a little bit difficult to understand, and I took a little time picking up on the nuances of the meaning. I had to go to the Christian Standard Bible, which says, fools mock at making reparation, but there is goodwill among the upright. Then the English Standard Version throws in for sin or making reparation, guilt offering. So I had to do a little digging on this to understand what Solomon was referring to. So to understand the nuances of these definitions, I want to go to the Old Testament and look at some verses in Leviticus, and I'll read those. Chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. If a person sins and commits trespass against the Lord by lying to his neighbor about what was delivered to him for safekeeping, or about a pledge, or about a robbery, or if he has extorted from his neighbor, or if he has found what was lost and lies concerning it, and swears falsely in any one of these things that a man may do in which he sins, then it shall be, because he has sinned and is guilty, that he shall restore what is stolen, or the thing which has extorted, or what was delivered to him for safekeeping, or the lost thing which he found. If you recall back in the story of David, when Nathan came to him and told him about the little lamb that was stolen or eaten, whatever, David made a proclamation that whoever would do such a thing should pay so many fold over. In other words, what David was talking about is the law of restitution. In the Old Testament, as in Leviticus, you can read more there in chapter 6 and chapter 7 regarding this guilt offering, this sin offering, one of the 5 major offerings or sacrifices in the Old Testament. In other words, God established in the Old Testament, in the sacrificial system, laws regarding guilt or trespasses of stealing or keeping what was not yours. All these nuances of this definition assume the person indeed has committed a sin. And Solomon's point is kind of difficult to pick out here, but his point is that fools are so selfish that they cannot or will not do what God says in the appropriate restitution to those that they have damaged. In other words, they have no regard for the covenant. This is all about the covenant. The law that I read in Leviticus had to do with God's covenant with his people. And what Solomon is saying, that this person has no regard for God's covenant. They recognize that their covenant with God is of no avail. while the righteous person, or you remember what he called it, the prudent person. The prudent person does recognize that their covenant with God puts them in a covenant relationship with others as well, with other people. And therefore they do the right thing. They consider their steps. They consider what actions they take in life. They recognize that they have a covenant with God and other people. Verse 14. The backslider in heart will be filled with his own ways, but a good man will be satisfied from above. Again, the Christian standard has disloyal one for backslider. The idea here in the context of ancient Israel was that this was someone who lived, as I said, in disobedience to the covenant the Lord made with his people at Mount Sinai. Basically, this verse says that all sinners get their whatever their conduct deserves. Again, in Solomon's time, it was the covenant between the Lord and Israel. Today, it's the new covenant between Christ and those who believe in him. So this is kind of linking back to, like I said before we read these verses, the idea of contentment. One significant outcome of righteous conduct is contentment. It just, what Solomon's saying, it just feels good to do the right thing. So the next pair of verses deal with joy and happiness. And the point they bring, you cannot always determine one's happiness by their appearance. This is Solomon's point in these verses. Verse 10 and verse 13. Verse 10 says, the heart knows its own bitterness, and a stranger does not share its joy. Verse 13, I'll go ahead and read it. Even in laughter, the heart may sorrow, and the end of mirth may be grief. These two verses are very closely translated in the Christian Standard in your literature. The point, pretty simple. You cannot determine the true condition of another person's heart, even though they appear very happy. Example is when I know many of you are like me, I do the same thing. If I go into a store or come up to a clerk or something, they say, how are you? You know, my immediate response is, I'm doing okay, or I'm fine. And, even though a lot of people inside are in pretty sad shape, but, I'm not advocating that we pour out all our sad stories to those who might ask us, but we just need to be aware that people are sometimes hurting and they may appear to be very happy. But here's the good part. This is really what Solomon is getting to, I think. God alone knows what a person's heart holds, and God alone can bring an inner joy during turmoil. Verse 13 is the practical example. When grieving over someone's death, a lot of times we share amusing incidents. In just the last few weeks, in the passing of my good friend Jim Hurt, I spent days just remembering and thinking about all those funny, amusing things that we had gone through, and even at his celebration of life and at the graveside. But at some point, when that laughter subsides and melancholy sets in again. But again, Solomon's point, God's wisdom produces joy even where there's grief. We depend on God for that inner joy, that inner peace that we have, regardless of what our outward appearance looks like or what's going on inside us. The last pairing of verses in our lesson is verse 11 and 12, and this section is titled in the commentary that I had, Thriving, and I'll see if I can tie that in just a minute. Verse 11, the house of the wicked will be overthrown, but the tent of the upright will flourish. Verse 12, this is a very familiar verse. Verse 12 is something we quote quite often. There is a way that seems right to a man, but the end is the way of death. In this type of writing, this chiastic writing that I mentioned, that $10 word, the main point is the central verses of this collection from 8 through 15. Solomon's main point comes out here in verses 11 and 12. This is the brilliance of Solomon and how he wrote this proverb. He was, as we know, the world's most wisest person, and he had an ability to write that's just phenomenal, I think. So finally, we come to Solomon's main idea that he wanted to communicate in these verses of 8 through 15 and the verses that we have been discussing so far this morning. The main point is this: choosing the way of wickedness in life has only one possible destiny: destruction. All these verses have kind of tied in or related to around that main thought, that main idea. Look at how Solomon makes this contrast here between the house and the tent. Both, by the way, are analogous for our lifestyle. The house, we would think of the house as being the most sturdiest looking, the most permanent. Seemingly, we see someone's life and we think, boy, they are really doing great. And, the scripture talks about why is it that the wicked seem to flourish and the poor don't. That's what Solomon is talking about here. This house would seem like the most permanent, seemingly lifestyle of the wicked, but it will not stand in judgment. While on the other hand, the dwelling that seems the most vulnerable, the dwelling that seems less permanent, points to the lives of the upright that not only survive, but thrive. And that's the title of this section, Thriving. Verse 12, like I said, is a very familiar verse. We quote it quite often. It kind of restates this main idea in different words, and it presents to us a picture that Solomon wants us to see. Here's the picture of a man looking down the road. It appears the road is very level and straight. It looks like the road is the correct road to take, the correct road to follow. But there's just one problem. He does not consider what God thinks of this route. And that's the point Solomon's getting to. So he makes a conclusion about this road or a particular lifestyle based on his own thinking, based on his own criteria. And the lifestyle that is lived in sin and rebellion against God leads to death. We will all die, but Revelation speaks of a second death, which is separation from God for an eternity. Kind of referring back to our commentary, the stated purpose of this lesson is to show us that following God's wisdom leads to joy, while failing to do so leads to grief. And Solomon, in these verses, has encouraged us to live wisely, as the title of this lesson says. Again, he says, there is a way that seems right to a man, but the end is the way of death. Always consider the path that God would have us to take. I hope that you've got something out of the lesson this morning, and I encourage you to join us at 9 o'clock in our service in the Rock, and then again at 10:30 for our service in the sanctuary, and our online service at 10:30. Thank you.